this episode, we're going to explore a topic that sounds administrative but is actually one of the most practical parts of OT security: governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, and why it matters when the goal is to protect operations instead of frustrating them. Many beginners hear words like governance and compliance and imagine paperwork, audits, and people saying no, and that reputation can make GRC feel like the opposite of real security work. In industrial environments, though, the biggest security failures are often not caused by a lack of clever tools, but by unclear decisions, missing ownership, inconsistent processes, and changes that break production because no one coordinated. Good OT/GRC exists to prevent those failures by making security decisions predictable, explainable, and aligned with what the facility is trying to accomplish. It creates a shared language between engineering, operations, safety, leadership, and security so that security controls are chosen and maintained in a way that fits the reality of the plant. By the end, you should be able to explain what OT/GRC is, why it adds value, and how it helps security become an enabler of reliable operations rather than a constant conflict. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A simple way to define OT/GRC is that it is the set of rules, roles, and routines that guide how an organization makes security decisions for operational environments. Governance is about who decides and how decisions are made, including what priorities matter most and what authority different groups have. Risk is about identifying what could go wrong, how likely it is, and how severe the consequences would be, especially when safety and uptime are involved. Compliance is about meeting external requirements, like regulations and contractual obligations, and also internal requirements, like company policies and standards. In OT, these three are tightly connected because operational systems cannot be treated like office laptops, and the wrong security change can cause real production disruption. OT/GRC helps prevent the trap where security tries to copy IT practices without considering process impact, while operations tries to avoid security entirely because it feels disruptive. Instead, it aims for decisions that are disciplined and repeatable so that security becomes part of the operating model, not a bolt-on that appears only during an audit. One of the most important value points of OT/GRC is that it turns security from a series of one-off arguments into a consistent decision-making process. Without GRC, security often becomes a debate every time a change is proposed. Should we patch now? Should we allow remote access? Should we segment this network? Should we accept this vendor's default configuration? Those debates can be exhausting and slow, and they often end with whoever has the most influence in the moment, not whoever has the best risk reasoning. GRC creates a way to evaluate these decisions using agreed criteria and documented responsibilities. That does not mean every decision becomes easy, but it means decisions become explainable and defensible. In OT, explainability matters because the people responsible for safe operations need to understand why a control exists and what problem it is meant to prevent. When people understand the reason, they are more likely to support the control and less likely to bypass it under pressure. Another value of OT/GRC is that it helps security focus on outcomes that operations actually cares about, rather than focusing only on technical perfection. In industrial environments, operational outcomes include safety, reliability, throughput, quality, and regulatory compliance, and security must support those outcomes to be sustainable. A control that looks strong on paper but causes frequent downtime will eventually be resisted or quietly disabled. GRC helps by forcing a conversation about goals and constraints before controls are selected. For example, if a system has a narrow maintenance window and cannot be rebooted often, the governance process might prioritize segmentation and monitoring while scheduling patching in a disciplined, slower cycle. That is not a compromise that weakens security. It is a risk-informed choice that keeps operations stable while still reducing exposure. Beginners should recognize that in OT, security success is often measured by avoided incidents and stable production, not by how many controls you can check off. Risk management in OT also looks different because the consequences are different, and GRC provides a structure for capturing those consequences clearly. In IT, a common impact might be loss of data or productivity, which is serious. But in OT, the impact can include equipment damage, environmental release, product contamination, and physical harm. That means the same vulnerability can be evaluated differently depending on where it exists. A missing patch on a low-impact reporting server might be acceptable for a time, while the same missing patch on a system that influences process control could be unacceptable. GRC helps by creating a repeatable way to classify assets, understand criticality, and connect cybersecurity risks to operational risks. It also helps avoid the mistake of treating everything as equally critical, because when everything is critical, teams cannot prioritize effectively. Beginners should learn that risk management is not guessing. It is a disciplined way to compare choices under uncertainty. Governance is where this supports operations message becomes most real, because governance defines who gets a voice and who has final authority. In poorly governed environments, security may try to impose controls without understanding the process, and operations may reject security without understanding the threat. In well-governed environments, decisions involve the right stakeholders, including engineering and safety when appropriate, and they use shared criteria. For example, a policy on remote access might be approved only if it meets requirements for strong authentication, logging, and time-limited access, and the policy might also define an emergency process for urgent vendor support that still maintains accountability. This kind of governance protects operations because it reduces improvisation during crises, which is when the worst shortcuts happen. It also protects security because it prevents pressure from forcing risky exceptions without documentation or review. Beginners should remember that governance is not bureaucracy for its own sake. It is a way to keep decisions from being made in panic or in isolation. Compliance is often the most misunderstood part of GRC because people assume compliance means doing the minimum to pass an audit. In OT, compliance can certainly include external requirements, but it can also be a helpful forcing function that keeps basic hygiene from being neglected. For example, requirements for access control, logging, and change management can help ensure that OT systems are not managed in an ad hoc way that increases risk over time. That said, compliance is not the same as security. A compliance system can still be insecure if the controls are poorly implemented or if the environment changes and the controls are not maintained. The value of compliance within GRC is that it creates expectations and evidence, meaning you can show what you did and why, and you can demonstrate that controls are not just ideas but real practices. In industrial environments, evidence matters because incidents often lead to investigations, and the ability to show disciplined decision-making can be as important as the technical response. A crucial part of OT/GRC value is helping organizations manage change safely. OT environments often have long life cycles, specialized equipment, and strict production schedules, so changes must be planned carefully to avoid unintended downtime. GRC supports change management by defining when changes are allowed, how they are tested, who approves them, and how risks are assessed. It also helps define what kinds of changes require special review, such as changes to segmentation, remote access pathways, or systems that support safety functions. Without this discipline, security changes can break operations, and operational changes can break security, and both outcomes create conflict. With discipline, changes become routine and predictable, which reduces friction and improves trust. Beginners should see this as a key theme. When security is predictable, operations can plan for it, and planning is what keeps production stable. Another practical value is that GRC helps prevent the silent growth of exceptions. In many environments, there are good reasons for temporary exceptions, like a vendor needs access for troubleshooting, or a system cannot be patched until a shutdown. The problem is that temporary exceptions often become permanent because no one tracks them or revisits them. Over time, the environment becomes a collection of one-off decisions that no longer make sense, and risk grows quietly. A strong GRC program creates a way to record exceptions, assign an owner, set a review date, and decide whether to renew, fix, or retire the exception. This reduces risk without causing sudden disruption, because the program can prioritize the most dangerous exceptions first. It also makes security more fair and consistent, because everyone follows the same process rather than negotiating exceptions through personal relationships. Beginners should learn that consistency is a security control in its own right, because inconsistent rules are easy to exploit and hard to defend. GRC also improves communication, which may sound soft, but communication failures cause many real incidents. OT security often involves multiple groups with different priorities and vocabularies, and misunderstandings can lead to risky workarounds. For example, a security team might say a system is critical, meaning it is a high-value target, while an operator might hear critical as do not touch it, meaning they resist changes forever. GRC provides a shared language, like agreed definitions for criticality, acceptable risk, and approval authority, which reduces misinterpretation. It also provides a way to translate security needs into operational terms, like how a control reduces the chance of a shutdown or protects process integrity. When security can describe controls as supporting reliability and safety, not as checking boxes, it is more likely to earn cooperation. Beginners should recognize that security in OT is a team sport, and GRC is part of how the team stays coordinated. Finally, the phrase security that supports operations, not fights them, is really about alignment and trust. OTGRC creates alignment by ensuring that security decisions reflect operational realities and business priorities, and it creates trust by making decisions consistent and accountable. When operations trust security, they are more willing to report problems, adopt controls, and participate in planning. When security trusts operations, they are less likely to demand unrealistic changes and more likely to focus on risk reduction that fits the environment. The outcome is not a perfect environment with zero risk, because that does not exist, but an environment where risk is managed intentionally and transparently. In a mature OT program, GRC is not a separate department that appears once a year. It is the set of routines that keeps security and operations moving in the same direction. If you can explain that GRC brings structure to decisions, connects security to operational outcomes, manages change and exceptions, and creates evidence that holds up under scrutiny, you will understand why OTGRC is not paperwork for its own sake, but a foundation for security that actually works in the real world.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.